In the world of high finance, fortunes are made and lost in the blink of an eye. It's a world of glass towers and steel nerves, where the line between a brilliant investment and a devastating betrayal is razor thin. But what happens when the final account is settled not in dollars, but in blood? Tonight, we're taking the express elevator to the penthouse suite of a powerful investment bank, where a titan of the industry was found dead, and the numbers just didn't add up. This is a story about a ruthless plot hidden behind a quiet smile, and a secretary who was keeping a very different kind of ledger. Before we examine the portfolio of this crime, make sure you subscribe to our channel and activate notifications. You won't want to miss the final, shocking dividend. Now, the market is closed. The investigation is open. The offices of Sterling and Finch Investment Bank were not so much a workplace as they were a declaration of dominance. Located on the 80th floor of a gleaming, obsidian skyscraper that pierced the city's skyline like a shard of black glass, they were a world unto themselves. This was a realm of hushed, conditioned air, of panoramic, floor-to-ceiling windows that reduced the bustling, chaotic city below to a silent, intricate, and manageable circuit board. It was a place of a palpable, high-stakes tension that hummed just beneath the surface of the polished granite floors and serene, minimalist, and obscenely expensive decor. This was a place where billions of dollars were conjured and moved with the silent click of a mouse, and where the men who moved them were seen and saw themselves as modern-day gods, unbound by the terrestrial concerns of the mortals they observed from their perch. The chief deity in this rarefied pantheon was Marcus Thorne, the bank's founder, CEO, and guiding predatory spirit. At 55, Marcus was a man who radiated an aura of absolute power. He was movie star handsome, impeccably dressed in suits that cost more than most people's cars, and possessed a reptilian, almost hypnotic charm that could soothe the most nervous of investors and eviscerate corporate rivals with equal, chilling efficiency. His corner office was a testament to his success and his ego, a vast, glass-walled cage with a view that seemed to encompass the entire, conquerable world. It was a throne room from which he ruled his ever-expanding financial empire. On a crisp, clear Tuesday morning, the well-oiled, ruthlessly efficient machine of Sterling and Finch came to a grinding, horrified halt. Marcus Thorne was found dead in his office. He was discovered by his long-serving, impeccably efficient, and almost invisible executive secretary, an unassuming woman in her late 40s named Evelyn Reed. Her scream, a sound of pure, unadulterated, and shockingly unprofessional terror, was the first signal, the opening siren in a drama that would send shockwaves through the entire financial world. Detective Alistair Corbin and his younger, sharper, and more tech-savvy partner, Detective Sasha Petrova, arrived to a scene of surreal corporate chaos. The 80th floor, usually a hive of quiet, focused, and monastic activity, was a swirling, panicked mass of $1,000 suited bankers, bewildered private security guards, and the grim, methodical, and unimpressed presence of the first responders. The scene in the CEO's office was one of stark, minimalist, and brutal violence. Marcus Thorne was slumped forward over his massive, obsidian desk, his head resting on a stack of neatly arranged quarterly reports. A single, dark, wet, and shockingly vibrant stain was spreading across the back of his custom-tailored Brioni shirt. Protruding from between his shoulder blades was the handle of an incredibly ornate and incredibly sharp Japanese katana-style letter opener, a famous affectation of his, a gift from a vanquished rival, that was always displayed in a neat, leather-lined tray on his desk. "No signs of forced entry," Corbin grunted, his weary, experienced eyes taking in the scene with a practiced, dispassionate gaze. The office was a fortress, protected by a high-tech security system that could only be accessed with Marcus's unique, encrypted keycard and his biometric thumbprint on a scanner beside the door. Killer was either invited in or they had his credentials. This isn't a random act. Petrova was looking at the victim, her mind already working, processing the details. Single stab wound direct to the heart from behind. Clean, professional, and delivered with significant force. He was likely sitting at his desk, working, completely unaware. The killer was someone he trusted implicitly, someone who could get that close to him without raising any alarm whatsoever. The investigation began, as it always did, with the usual cast of characters in a drama of high-stakes finance. The rivals, the partners, the spurned lovers. Marcus Thorne's life, they quickly discovered, was a veritable minefield of potential motives, a landscape littered with the bodies of those he had professionally and personally destroyed. First, they interviewed his partner, Julian Croft. Croft was the Sterling to Marcus's Finch, the quiet, analytical, and risk-averse numbers man to Marcus's charismatic, high-stakes rainmaker. He was visibly shaken, his face pale and drawn, a stark contrast to his usual unflappable composure. "This is a catastrophe," he stammered, his hands trembling as he loosened his perfectly knotted tie. "A complete and utter catastrophe. For the bank, for the markets, for our clients." Marcus was the face of this firm. He was the engine. We had our disagreements, of course. That's no secret. He was a gambler, a risk-taker. I'm more conservative. We clashed, violently, over a major upcoming merger he was pushing through. But this is unthinkable, unimaginable. But a deeper look into the partnership, facilitated by a series of anonymous, fearful junior partners, revealed that the disagreements were more like a corporate civil war. Marcus had been planning to use the controversial merger to dilute Julian's shares and leverage him out of the firm they had built together, a fact that Julian was well aware of. Marcus's death not only saved Julian's position and his fortune, it made him the sole, undisputed head of the multi-billion-dollar bank. Next, they looked at his messy and very public personal life. Marcus was in the middle of a spectacularly bitter divorce from his wife of 20 years, a formidable and famously sharp-tongued socialite named Beatrice Thorne. The divorce, which was the talk of the town's elite circles, was set to cost him half of his billion-dollar fortune. Her motive was as clear and as hard as the giant, flawless diamond on her finger. "I wanted his money, detective, not his life," she said, her voice dripping with an icy contempt as she sat in her palatial, art-filled apartment. "A dead Marcus is worth far less to me than a living one I can publicly and systematically fleece in court. Do the math. It's simple." Her alibi was that she was at a high-profile charity luncheon at the plaza with 50 of the city's most powerful and most gossip-hungry women. Then there was the long and growing list of corporate rivals he had financially ruined. The most recent and most vocal was a young, hot-headed, and newly bankrupt tech CEO named Leo Vance, whose innovative company Marcus had gutted in a hostile takeover just weeks earlier. Vance had been heard by multiple witnesses at a downtown bar publicly vowing to get his revenge and to see Marcus Thorne burn. The case was a classic puzzle of greed, power, and revenge. But the central, maddening problem remained the locked, high-security office. How had the killer gotten in? And how had they gotten close enough to a notoriously paranoid man to use his own letter opener against him? The key to that question, and to Marcus Thorne's entire professional life, was his secretary, Evelyn Reed. She was the gatekeeper, the architect of his daily life, the woman who managed his schedule, his calls, his correspondence, his secrets. She had been with him for 20 years, from his early, hungry days as a junior partner to his current status as a titan of the universe. She was a fixture of quiet, unassuming, and almost robotic efficiency, a woman who seemed to blend into the serene, beige background of the corporate office, a piece of the furniture, as essential and as overlooked as the air conditioning. When they interviewed her, just hours after she had discovered the body, she was a study in controlled, professional grief. She was pale, her intelligent eyes red-rimmed and magnified by her simple, elegant glasses, but she spoke with a calm, methodical precision that was clearly second nature. "I arrived at 8:30 a.m., as I always do," she explained, her voice a soft, steady monotone that betrayed no hint of the trauma she had just endured. Mr. Thorne always arrived at 7 a.m. He valued that quiet hour of work before the markets opened and the chaos of the day began. The door to his office was closed. I assumed he was on an early call with our Hong Kong office. At 9 a.m., when he hadn't buzzed for his morning coffee, which he always did precisely at 9, I became concerned. I knocked. There was no answer. I used my master keycard to override the lock, as is the protocol in an emergency situation. And I found him. She was, to all appearances, the perfect witness. Calm, observant, and seemingly devoted to the boss she had served for 2 decades. She provided the detectives with access to his calendars, his private emails, his call logs. She was the key to his world, the one person who knew all the secrets. As the first days of the investigation passed, the case stalled. It was a frustrating series of compelling motives and dead ends. Julian Croft's alibi was weak. He claimed to be working from home, alone. But there was no physical evidence, no digital trail, linking him to the scene. Beatrice Thorne's alibi was ironclad. Leo Vance, the hot-headed tech CEO, had a confirmed alibi. He had been on a flight to Tokyo at the time of the murder. The case was a frustrating, high-profile puzzle with too many pieces that didn't fit. Petrova, a detective who believed that every crime left a digital ghost, a faint, electronic fingerprint in the vast, interconnected web of modern life, decided to do a deep, forensic dive into the office's security systems. She focused on the raw, unformatted logs for the keycard access to the 80th floor and to Marcus's private office. The official, neatly formatted reports were pristine. They showed Marcus Thorne arriving at 6:58 a.m. They showed Evelyn Reed arriving at 8:30 a.m. And they showed Evelyn Reed using her master keycard to open the door at 9:02 a.m., the moment she had discovered the body. There were no other entries. No ghost employees, no unauthorized access cards. Nothing. According to the official timeline, the murder was impossible. Marcus was alive and alone at 6:58. He was dead by 9:02, and no one else had entered his impregnable office. Frustrated, Petrova decided to look at the raw, messy data, the unformatted, second-by-second data stream from the building's central server farm in the basement. For hours, she sifted through an endless, mind-numbing stream of digital noise, of code that represented every door, every elevator, every light switch in the entire 82-story building. And then, in the early hours of the morning, she found it. A single, anomalous, and almost invisible data packet. At exactly 7:15 a.m., the security monitoring system for Marcus Thorne's office, the door sensor, the motion detector, the internal camera feed had gone completely offline for a period of exactly 4 seconds. It was an infinitesimal blip, a digital hiccup that would be invisible on any standard end-of-day report. But it was there, and it had been initiated not by an external hack or a system failure, but by an internal administrative command. A command that required the highest possible level of security clearance. A level of clearance that was, according to the bank's own tight-lipped IT department, held by only 2 people in the entire global organization. The CEO, Marcus Thorne himself, and his trusted executive secretary, Evelyn Reed, for use in emergency situations. The discovery was a lightning bolt that illuminated the entire, shadowy landscape of the case. The quiet, helpful, and unassuming secretary had the power and the knowledge to create a perfect four-second blind spot in the most secure office in the building. Petrova now looked at Evelyn Reed with new, sharp, and deeply suspicious eyes. She was the one who controlled the flow of all information. She was the one who had discovered the body. She was the one who had appeared to be the most helpful and the least emotional. The perfect witness was suddenly, terrifyingly, the perfect suspect. But why? What possible motive could a loyal career secretary, a woman who had dedicated her life to her job, have for committing such a ruthless and brutal murder against the man who was the source of her livelihood, her identity? The answer, Petrova knew with a sudden, chilling certainty, was not in the corporate rivalries or the messy divorce. The answer had to be something deeper, something more personal, a secret that had been hidden for 20 long years behind a mask of quiet, unassuming, and flawless efficiency. The discovery of the 4-second security blackout was the first loose thread in the impeccably woven, beige-colored fabric of Evelyn Reed's professional persona. To Detective Petrova, it was a signal, a deliberate whisper in the digital static that suggested the quiet, efficient, and almost invisible secretary was far more than she appeared. The challenge now was to pull that thread, gently but firmly, to unravel the entire hidden story of the woman who had spent 2 decades as a ghost in the machine of high finance. Their first approach was to re-interview Evelyn, this time not as a grieving witness, but as a person of interest. They brought her into a sterile, windowless interview room at the precinct, a world of gray, acoustic-tiled walls and harsh, fluorescent lighting, a universe away from the plush, beige comfort and panoramic views of her 80th floor office. Stripped of her familiar, powerful environment, she seemed smaller, more vulnerable, yet she maintained an unnerving, almost preternatural calm. "Evelyn," Petrova began, her tone deliberately gentle but firm, the opening move in a complex game of chess. "We need to go over the timeline of that morning one more time. You stated in your original report that you arrived at your desk at 8:30. "That's correct," Evelyn said, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her voice the same calm, steady monotone she used to schedule meetings and field calls. "But the building's main entry logs show you swiped your access card at the main lobby turnstile at 7:05 a.m., Petrova countered, sliding a printed log sheet across the cold, steel table. The ink was dark and definitive. "You were in the building for over an hour and a half before you went up to your office. That's a significant amount of time. Where were you?" For the first time since they had met her, a flicker of something panic? Annoyance? A flash of pure, cold anger crossed Evelyn's placid, intelligent features. It was there and gone in an instant, a micro-expression so fleeting that Corbin, less attuned to such subtleties, missed it entirely. I went to the company gym in the basement level," she said, her voice a little too quick, a little too rehearsed. "I like to work out before the day officially starts. It helps me focus." It was a plausible lie, a perfect, corporate-friendly excuse. But it was a lie nonetheless. A quick, discreet call to the building's central security office confirmed what Petrova already suspected. The high-tech, members-only gym had its own, separate keycard access system, a system that showed no record of Evelyn Reed entering that morning, or any other morning for the past year. "Let's talk about the security system for Mr. Thorne's office," Petrova continued, pressing her advantage, not letting the lie settle. "We found a 4-second gap in the sensor and camera logs, commencing at precisely 7:15 a.m. A gap, a blind spot that could only be initiated with a Level 7 administrative command. A command that only you and Mr. Thorne had the clearance and the technical knowledge to issue." Evelyn Reed stared at the steel table, her composure beginning to visibly fray at the edges. A tiny, almost imperceptible muscle began to twitch in her jaw. "I don't know anything about that," she whispered, her voice losing its steady, professional cadence for the first time. "It must have been a system glitch. Those systems are notoriously buggy." "There was no glitch, Evelyn," Corbin said, his deep, rumbling voice filling the small, claustrophobic room, a stark contrast to Petrova's scalpel-like precision. "It was a deliberate manual override. You created a window, for seconds, just enough time for someone to slip into his office without triggering an alarm or leaving a digital record. Who was it? Evelyn? Who were you helping? Julian Croft? Did he promise you a promotion? A piece of the pie?" They were pushing her, trying to break her, trying to force her into the role of a simple, easily understood accomplice. But she wouldn't break. She held firm, retreating into a shell of quiet, obstinate denial, her silence more powerful and more frustrating than any shouted lie. She was a fortress, and they didn't have the key. Frustrated, Petrova decided to change tactics completely. If Evelyn wouldn't give up her own secrets, Petrova would have to excavate them herself. She began a deep, forensic dive into Evelyn Reed's life, a 20-year archaeological dig into the history of a woman who had made a long and successful career out of being utterly, completely invisible. On the surface, her life was a study in unassuming, almost monastic normalcy. She lived in a modest, but impeccably neat, pre-war apartment in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood, a world away from the glamorous, cutthroat realm she inhabited during the day. She had no family to speak of, a few casual friends from a book club, and her only listed hobby was reading classic Russian literature. Her financial records were pristine, her credit score perfect. She was a ghost, a woman who had left almost no personal trace on the world. But a ghost is still defined by the space it occupies, by the life it once lived. Petrova started looking not at Evelyn, but at the world around her, at the small, seemingly insignificant details of her life before Sterling and Finch. She pulled her original employment application from 20 years ago, a document yellowed with age, from the bank's deep storage archives. The references were impeccable, glowing. But one name, listed under the heading Personal Character Reference, stood out. It was a university professor of economics, now long retired, named Dr. Alistair Finch. Petrova tracked down the old professor. He was living in a quiet retirement home north of the city, his body frail, but his mind still as sharp as a tack. He remembered Evelyn Reed vividly, with the fond, sad clarity of a teacher recalling a star pupil who had never fulfilled her promise. "Evelyn Reed," he said, a wistful look in his old, intelligent eyes. "An astonishingly brilliant student. One of the brightest, most intuitive minds I ever had the privilege of teaching. Her grasp of macroeconomic theory was profound, innate. I always thought she was destined for a brilliant career, to run a hedge fund, or to be a major policy player at the World Bank. I was genuinely shocked and deeply disappointed when I learned she had taken a job as an executive secretary. It seemed like a terrible, inexplicable waste of her prodigious talent. This was the first major crack in the facade, a piece of information that completely recontextualized the woman they thought they were investigating. Evelyn Reed was not just an efficient secretary. She was a brilliant economist, a woman with the intellectual firepower to rival, or even surpass, her own powerful boss. "Why do you think she did it?" Petrova asked gently. "Why would a woman with her potential take a job so far beneath her capabilities?" The old professor sighed, a sad, knowing sound. "Her father," he said. "He was a brilliant man, too. An old-school stockbroker, a man of honor and integrity, from a time when a man's word was his bond. He was financially ruined in the late 1990s during the dot-com bust, completely wiped out by a new, ruthless breed of predatory corporate raiders who saw the market not as a place to build things, but as a casino. He lost everything. His firm, his reputation, his savings. He died of a massive heart attack less than a year later. Evelyn, who was devoted to him, always believed he died of a broken heart. I think his ruin broke something in her, too. She lost her ambition, her fire. The light just went out. It was a profound tragedy." Petrova felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated adrenaline, the hunter's thrill of a scent finally caught on the wind. She rushed back to the precinct and, using her access to old financial news archives, began searching for the story of Evelyn's father. She found it, a series of small, almost forgotten articles from the financial pages of 20 years ago. A small, respected, and independent brokerage firm, run by a man named Thomas Reed, had been the victim of a brutal, and at the time highly controversial, hostile takeover. The takeover was famous in financial circles for its brutal, take-no-prisoners efficiency, a textbook example of the new, aggressive style of corporate raiding. The man who had orchestrated that takeover, the young, rising star of Wall Street who had made his name and his first fortune by destroying Thomas Reed and his firm, was a man named Marcus Thorne. The entire case, in that one, stunning moment, snapped into a new, terrifying, and perfectly logical focus. Evelyn Reed's entire 20-year career had been a lie. A magnificent, patient, and diabolical performance. She was not a loyal secretary. She was a saboteur, an agent of vengeance, a daughter who had infiltrated the inner sanctum of her family's destroyer. She had taken a job as his secretary not out of a lack of ambition, but as part of a long, patient, and deeply personal plan. She had made herself indispensable, the quiet, efficient ghost in his machine. She had become his silent partner, the keeper of his secrets, the architect of his life, all the while learning his weaknesses, his vulnerabilities, waiting, with an almost inhuman patience, for the perfect moment to strike. This new, explosive narrative reframed every single piece of the evidence. The murder was not about a corporate merger or a messy divorce. It was about a 20-year-old vendetta, a daughter's promise to a dead father. The sophisticated, inside knowledge required to bypass the impenetrable security, the intimate, trusted access required to get close enough to him to strike, only she possessed it. Petrova and Corbin now understood, with a chilling certainty, that they were not dealing with a simple accomplice who had helped a killer get into the room. They were dealing with the killer herself. The quiet, unassuming woman who had poured Marcus Thorne's coffee every morning for 20 years was the same woman who had ruthlessly and methodically plotted his demise. But one crucial, emotional piece was still missing. The brutality of the crime. The image of the ornate letter opener, plunged into his back with such force. It was a crime of visceral, personal rage. It seemed at odds with the cold, patient, intellectual nature of her long-planned, chess-like revenge. Why, after 20 years of quiet, meticulous, and cold-blooded planning, would she resort to such a messy, violent, and passionate act? The answer, Petrova suspected, was not in the distant past, but in the immediate present. Something must have happened to accelerate her plan, to turn her Cold War of infiltration into a hot, violent, and final act of murder. They went back to the bank's records, this time looking for something new, something that had crossed Evelyn's desk in the final weeks leading up to the murder. They searched Marcus Thorne's recent financial dealings, his private correspondence, the things that Evelyn, his trusted gatekeeper, would have seen. And they found it. A week before he was killed, Marcus Thorne had finalized the purchase of a new, personal property. A small, historic, and financially struggling vineyard in the country. He had bought it for pennies on the dollar at a bankruptcy auction, planning to use it as a weekend retreat. The name of the vineyard, the name of the family that had owned it for generations and had just tragically lost it, was the Reed family vineyard. It was the last sentimental remnant of Evelyn's father's legacy, a place she had been secretly and desperately supporting with her modest secretary's salary for years, the one tangible link to the happy, sun-drenched memories of her childhood. Marcus Thorne, in a final, casual, and utterly indifferent act of corporate cruelty, had unknowingly taken the very last thing she had left of her father. He had not just destroyed her past. He had, with the stroke of a pen, devoured her present. And in doing so, he had signed his own death warrant. He had turned her cold, patient, and perfectly planned revenge into a hot, urgent, and uncontrollable rage. The 20-year wait was over. The discovery of the Reed family vineyard was the final, crucial, and blood-red entry in the dark, meticulous ledger of Evelyn Reed's motive. It was the catalyst, the emotional accelerant that had transformed her 20-year-long, simmering Cold War into a sudden, violent, and deeply personal act of retribution. Detectives Corbin and Petrova now understood not just the how and the who, but the deeply personal, profoundly painful, and utterly compelling why. The final confrontation with Evelyn would not be about breaking her denial or tricking her into a confession. It would be about forcing her to acknowledge the brutal, tragic truth of her own, long-hidden narrative. They decided, once again, to control the environment, to set the stage for the final act of this long-running drama. They didn't summon her back to the sterile, impersonal confines of the precinct. Instead, they arranged for a final, unscheduled meeting in the one place that represented both her long, silent servitude and her ultimate, violent, and bloody triumph. Marcus Thorne's glass-walled corner office on the 80th floor. The office had been professionally, almost antiseptically, cleaned and restored to its pristine, minimalist state by the bank's damage control team, a hasty and desperate attempt to erase the memory of the violence that had occurred there. The massive obsidian desk was polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the glittering, indifferent city below. The expensive, abstract art was back on the walls. The only thing missing was the man himself. When Evelyn arrived, she was, as always, the perfect, composed picture of calm, unassuming efficiency. She had agreed to the meeting under the pretense of helping them close out some final, procedural questions regarding Thorne's estate. But as she stepped into the office, the room where she had spent 20 years of her life as a silent, loyal shadow, and saw the two detectives waiting for her, their expressions grim and knowing, she understood that this was not a procedural meeting. Her calm, professional composure did not falter, but a new, steely, and almost defiant stillness came over her. "Evelyn," Petrova began, her voice quiet but resonant in the unnaturally silent, glass-walled room. We know about your father. We know about Thomas Reed. We know what Marcus Thorne did to him and to your family. Evelyn stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, her back to them, looking down at the city below, a city that Marcus had believed he owned. She said nothing. She simply watched the tiny, silent cars moving along the streets, like blood cells through the city's arteries. We also know that you were not just a secretary, Petrova continued, her voice steady, laying out the undeniable evidence piece by piece, like a prosecutor making her final, irrefutable closing argument. You were a brilliant economist, a student with a future that could have rivaled, and perhaps even surpassed, Marcus's own. But you gave that all up. You chose a different path. You chose to come here. You made yourself invisible. You made yourself indispensable. You played the long game, Evelyn. A very, very long game. Corbin stepped forward, his large, imposing presence a stark contrast to Evelyn's quiet stillness. He held a single, glossy photograph. It was an aerial shot of a beautiful, sun-drenched vineyard, with a charming old stone house nestled among the rows of vines. And then he did this, Corbin said, his deep, gravelly voice a low rumble. He took the last piece, the Reed family vineyard. He probably didn't even know what he was doing. To him, it was just another asset on a balance sheet, another small, satisfying victory in a lifetime of them. But to you, it was everything, wasn't it? Evelyn finally turned from the window. The mask of the unassuming, deferential secretary was gone, completely and irrevocably. In its place was a woman of formidable intelligence and a cold, chillingly profound anger, an anger that had been nurtured in the dark, in silence, for 2 long decades. He was a predator, she said, her voice no longer a soft, deferential monotone, but a clear, steady, and sharp instrument of judgment. He didn't build things. He consumed them. He consumed my father's company. He consumed his spirit. And then, after 20 years of me watching, of me waiting, of me documenting his every crime, he came for my father's memory. He was going to turn my father's home, the only place I was ever truly happy, into some corporate retreat for his vacuous, sycophantic, and soul-dead vice presidents. He was going to put his name, the name Thorne, on the stone gate where my grandfather's name had been carved. The final insult, the final erasure. It was a confession, delivered with the cold, hard clarity of a final, audited, and bloody financial statement. You had a plan all along, didn't you? Petrova asked, already knowing the answer. A different plan, something cleaner, something more elegant, to ruin him financially, as he had ruined your father. A small, mirthless, and deeply chilling smile touched Evelyn's lips. Of course, that was the art of it, the beauty, the perfect, symmetrical revenge. For 20 years I was his silent partner. I saw every deal, every weakness, every secret offshore account. I was slowly, methodically, and brilliantly building a case against him that would have dismantled his entire empire. Insider trading, market manipulation, tax fraud. I had it all documented, cross-referenced, and ready to be delivered anonymously to the federal regulators. It would have been a masterpiece of financial revenge. Poetic, clean. He would have died a pauper, disgraced and forgotten, just like my father. That was the plan. She walked over to the massive obsidian desk and ran a hand over its cool, smooth, and unforgiving surface. But when I saw the final, signed paperwork for the vineyard, sitting right here, in his inbox, something in me broke. Or maybe, she corrected herself, a strange, thoughtful look in her eyes. Something was finally repaired. The abstract, intellectual idea of a slow, clean, financial revenge was no longer enough. The debt he owed was not financial. It was personal. It was a debt of blood. And it had to be paid in kind. She described the final day with a chilling, almost out-of-body lucidity. The words she had clearly replayed in her mind 1,000 times. She had arrived at 7:05 a.m., her mind a perfect, calm storm of rage and newfound, absolute purpose. She had gone not to the gym, but to a small and used storage closet on a lower floor, a place she had prepared months ago for this very moment, a place that contained a single, simple change of clothes. "I used my administrative access to create the 4-second window," she said, her voice as calm as if she were dictating a memo. "I slipped into his office at 7:15, while he was in his private bathroom, performing his morning ablutions. He was a creature of absolute, unvarying habit. I knew his schedule to the second. I knew he would be in there for exactly 4 minutes. I took the letter opener from his desk. It was his favorite toy, a symbol of his power, a gift from the Japanese executive whose company he had gutted and destroyed the year before. The irony was perfect. She had hidden behind the heavy, soundproof door of his private closet. When he had come out, refreshed and ready for his day of conquest, and had sat down at his desk, his back to the room, to begin his daily ritual of reviewing the overnight market reports, she had simply stepped out behind him. "He never heard me," she whispered, a strange, haunted, and yet deeply satisfied look in her eyes. He was so consumed by the numbers on his screen, so focused on his own reflection in the polished black of his desk, that he never felt the presence of the woman who had stood silently behind him for 20 long years. There was no struggle. There were no final words. There was just a final accounting, a debt, finally and fully paid. Her confession was complete. She had not only admitted to the crime, but had laid bare the 2 decades of profound pain and meticulous, cold-blooded planning that had led to it. She was not just a killer. She was the self-appointed executor of a long-overdue and deeply personal justice. As Corbin stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting in the bright morning light streaming through the glass walls, to place her under arrest, Evelyn Reed showed no fear, no regret. She simply looked at him with the calm, steady gaze of a woman who had finally, after a lifetime of waiting, balanced her own personal ledger, and found it to be, at last, perfectly and beautifully in order. "Do you know the first thing he ever taught me 20 years ago on my first day?" she asked, her voice quiet, as Corbin gently took her arm. "He said, 'Evelyn, in this business there are no emotions. There are only assets and liabilities.' He was wrong. Emotion is the ultimate asset, the one that appreciates over time, quietly, silently, until it is ready to be leveraged. He just never knew how to value it." Evelyn Reed, the quiet secretary, the silent partner, the perfect ghost, was finally and completely accounted for. In the end, the most dangerous liabilities aren't the ones on a balance sheet. They are the human debts, the emotional accounts left unpaid, silently accumulating interest in the dark for years. Evelyn Reed's story is a chilling reminder that in the cold, hard world of numbers, the only equation that truly matters is the one that balances the scales of justice, no matter how high the price. Thank you for joining us for this final audit. If you believe the most compelling mysteries are the ones that reveal the hidden assets and secret liabilities of the human heart, be sure to subscribe and click the bell. The market is closed. This case is closed.